In the quiet darkness of the medieval world, long before the glow of electricity, long before insulated walls, heaters, or warm fireplaces in every home, the poor people of the Middle Ages faced winters so bitter that even the breath from their lungs could turn into frost on the inside of their own cottage walls. Imagine a world where the cold was not just a seasonal discomfort, but a silent enemy, an enemy that slipped through cracked doors, broken roofs, and thin blankets, creeping into every bone, every joint, and every dream. And yet, millions of poor villagers, laborers, shepherds, servants, and wandering workers found ways to sleep, to rest, and to survive the freezing nights that seemed endless. Their story is not only surprising, it is strangely comforting. Because their world moved slowly, gently, like a whispering wind over snow, and their nights, though cold, were filled with a kind of peaceful stillness that we, in our loud modern age, rarely get to feel. Tonight, we travel back in time, easing into the silence of medieval winter nights, discovering how the poorest families slept when the temperature fell so low that even rivers froze, and wolves wandered closer to the villages. And as we explore their world, the calm rhythm of their nightly rituals may slowly lull your mind into rest, helping you drift gently into sleep. Poor medieval families often lived in small, single-room houses made of wattle and daub, thin wooden frames smeared with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. These walls cracked easily in the cold. Wind whistled through them like a ghost searching for warmth. Roofs were made of thatch, and during winter, frost often formed between the dried reeds. These homes were not insulated. They were not sealed. At night, temperatures inside could be almost as cold as outside. So the first secret to surviving the cold was simple: people slept close together. Entire families, parents, children, sometimes grandparents, sometimes even a visiting neighbor, would huddle on the same sleeping platform, often nothing more than a wooden frame topped with straw. The straw was rough, itchy, but it trapped some warmth. People added old sacks, worn-out tunics, cloaks full of patches, animal skins, and sometimes piles of dried grass to build up a sort of nest. They didn't sleep apart. They slept like a cluster, a human hearth, sharing body heat. The poor in medieval Europe believed deeply in a simple truth: one body alone freezes, but many bodies together survive. Their beds were not like modern beds. There were no thick mattresses or high pillows. Most poor people slept on straw pallets laid directly on the floor. And during winter, the floors of medieval cottages were bitterly cold, packed dirt, sometimes covered with rushes, but often damp and frozen. So families lifted the sleeping pallets slightly off the ground using stones or wooden blocks to avoid direct contact with the cold earth. Even a few inches made a difference. Another trick the poor used was sleeping with animals. Not pets, livestock. The family goat, a sheep, or even a chicken might sleep inside the same room. Their bodies produced warmth, raising the temperature inside the hut by a few degrees. In poor villages of northern Europe, it was common for the family cow to be kept in a small stall connected to the main living area. The smell was strong, but the heat was precious. Many medieval chroniclers mention that winter survival often depended on the warmth of animals more than anything else. Nights were long, often more than 14 hours of darkness. But people didn't sleep all at once. They followed a pattern of segmented sleep: first sleep and second sleep. Poor villagers would go to bed shortly after sunset because candles were expensive, and firewood was scarce. They slept for 4 or 5 hours, then woke up naturally in the middle of the night. During this quiet period, they stoked the fire, prayed, told soft stories, checked on the animals, and sometimes even visited neighbors because everyone was awake at the same hour. Then they went back to sleep until dawn. This rhythm matched the natural cycle of winter darkness. But keeping a fire through the night was tricky. Firewood was expensive and difficult to gather in winter. So many poor families used peat, dried animal dung, or leftover bits of broken wood to keep a small, low fire smoldering. The goal wasn't to produce heat, it was simply to keep the fire alive so it didn't need to be restarted from scratch in the morning. Most cottages had only a faint orange glow in the corner of the room, enough to give a little psychological comfort, if not physical warmth. Clothing also played a role in surviving the cold. Poor medieval people slept fully dressed. They wore woolen tunics, thick socks made of scraps, sometimes 2 or 3 layers of old shirts, and a hood or cap to cover their head. Wool was life-saving. Even soaked with moisture, wool could still insulate. A medieval proverb said, "Wool remembers warmth longer than man does." Wool hats were especially important because people believed heat escaped mainly through the head. So almost everyone, even children, went to sleep wearing a hood or a cap. The coldest time of the night was just before dawn. This was when the fire was lowest, when the cold pressed hardest against the thin walls, and when hunger often mixed with shivering. Many poor families slept curled tightly, knees to chest, arms wrapped around themselves. Some slept in pairs, locked back to back to trap heat. Children slept between adults, like insulation. But the nights were not only cold, they were quiet. The world outside was still, no engines, no electricity, no hum of modern life. Only the crackle of the fire, the occasional cry of an owl, the distant howl of a wolf, or the soft breathing of family members resting together. In the darkness, the simplest sounds felt comforting. A creaking wooden beam, the whisper of straw shifting, the gentle sigh of someone dreaming. And now, as we slip deeper into this world, we follow the rhythm of their winter nights. The cold had a way of reshaping people's habits. Every movement at night was slow, careful, and deliberate because even the smallest shift could let a pocket of cold air slip under the blankets of old cloth and straw. People learned to move like sleepers inside a cocoon, adjusting without letting warmth escape. A mother might gently turn to check on her child, pulling a patched wool blanket up to the child's chin with hands still stiff from working in the fields earlier that day. A father might reach out in the darkness to make sure the fire still glowed faintly. The cold made people attentive to each other, aware of every breath. But their sleep was not miserable the way we might imagine. It was a kind of shared endurance, a nightly ritual that brought families close. In many poor cottages, before lying down, families warmed stones in the fireplace. These stones, heated throughout the evening, were wrapped in cloth or old leather and placed near their feet in bed. The warmth faded quickly, but for the first few moments, it felt like a blessing. Children waited eagerly for the stones, and even though they were small comforts, they made a difference. A single warm stone could ease the cold shock of lying down on a straw mattress that felt frozen from the air. Sometimes families used embers inside small clay pots, primitive bed warmers. The pot, warm but not burning, was placed under the straw or beside the bed. It gave off a faint, comforting heat. People had to be careful because a spark could ignite the straw, but the poor were experts at managing these dangers. Survival trained by their own harsh lives. Food also influenced their sleep. Before going to bed, many poor families drank warm broth or thin ale. Not because it tasted good, but because warmth inside the stomach created a brief sense of comfort. Medieval people believed strongly that warm food before sleep kept away sickness, especially during winters when cold was thought to cause illness. So a simple bowl of cabbage broth, barley soup, or leftover stew was part of the bedtime ritual. Even if the broth was watery, even if the vegetables were few, the warmth eased the transition into sleep. Sleeping in winter was also tied to superstition. People believed certain spirits roamed more freely during long, cold nights. The poor whispered old stories before bed, tales of winter fairies, wandering ghosts, and angels who guarded sleeping children. Whether these stories were believed or simply told for comfort, they softened the weight of the cold. The darkness felt less empty when filled with old legends passed down between generations. In the middle of the night, during the waking period between first sleep and second sleep, people often whispered to each other. Quiet conversations drifted through the dim room. A husband and wife might talk about the next planting season, about a neighbor who'd fallen ill, or about the weather that seemed crueler each year. Parents told small stories to restless children to help them return to sleep. And sometimes this middle night waking was the only peaceful time adults had to talk, because daylight hours were filled with labor. During harsh winters, some families slept with their faces partially covered with cloth to warm their breath. But this came with another danger. If the cloth froze with condensation from breathing, it stiffened, making the cold feel even sharper when removed. So people carefully adjusted how much of their face to cover, balancing warmth against moisture. Every movement required a kind of wisdom learned through generations. The smell of winter nights inside a medieval cottage was a mixture of smoke, earth, straw, and the faint mustiness of wool that had been worn for weeks without washing. But these smells were normal to them, comforting even. The smoke darkened the ceiling beams, coating them with soot, but it also helped insulate the roof slightly. One of the unspoken truths of these poor homes was that smoke itself was a kind of blanket. It lingered in the upper parts of the room, reducing heat loss through the roof. So while the smoke irritated eyes and lungs, it also protected them from the biting cold. Even the sound of crackling firewood, rare and precious, was enough to make sleep easier. Fire was not simply heat, it was hope. And though poor families had small fires, carefully rationed, they cherished every spark. The glow lit up sleeping faces with a warm orange color, creating a sense of safety that allowed them to drift deeper into rest. In some parts of Europe, especially in places like Scandinavia and the Alps, the winters were so brutal that entire families built raised sleeping platforms near the kitchen hearth. The closer they were to the fire, the warmer the night felt. But they still had to be careful not to burn too much fuel. A single log might have to last hours. Families often went to sleep to the sound of the fire fading, knowing they wouldn't relight it until dawn. Imagine now the silence of the late medieval night. Outside, snow piles against the door. A thin wind taps on the walls. Inside, the fire dims slowly. A child turns in sleep, rustling the straw. A parent adjusts a blanket. The world is dark, but peaceful. This was the rhythm of winter sleep for the poor, slow, quiet, enduring. And when morning finally came, the coldest moments arrived. People woke to frost inside the room. Their breath hung visibly in the air. The first task after rising was always to rebuild the fire. Hands numb, they blew on embers, fed them twigs, coaxed them into flame. Only then could they stretch, shake the stiffness from their limbs, and prepare for the day's labor. Yet despite the hardship, there was beauty in their nights. A calmness, a slowness, a closeness to nature. People accepted the cycle of seasons in a way we rarely do now. Winter nights were long, but they taught patience, taught families to rely on one another, to share warmth, to endure gently. And so each night was a small survival story, repeated again and again, shaping the lives of millions over centuries. For the poorest in medieval villages, winter nights often blended into each other, becoming a long stretch of quiet endurance that lasted months. It was not just one night of cold they fought against, but dozens, sometimes hundreds. And with each passing night, they learned to read the weather not through windows or thermometers, none of which existed, but through the way the air settled inside the cottage. They could tell a bad night was coming if the air felt sharp even before sunset, if the smoke refused to rise smoothly through the roof hole, or if the animals grew restless. Experience had trained their senses to read the cold like a map. Many cottages had gaps in the walls where cold winds slipped easily through. To fight this, poor families stuffed these cracks with whatever they had: old rags, moss, straw, even mud mixed with animal hair. They patched the walls again and again throughout winter. These small repairs were not perfect, but they slowed the wind enough to make sleep possible. The feeling of cold wind brushing across the face at night was something everyone was used to. Children grew up knowing the sensation before they learned to read or write. There were no glass windows in poor homes. Instead, thin cloth or wooden shutters were used. When a winter storm approached, families secured these shutters tightly, sometimes placing stones or heavy sticks against them to prevent the wind from bursting them open. The sound of wind thrashing against the outside made the inside feel even more fragile. But this fragility was normal. People knew that the world outside was stronger than their walls, yet every night they trusted those walls again. In many regions, especially in England and France, winter nights came with a thick, heavy darkness. The only light inside the cottage came from the embers or a small tallow candle. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, had a distinct smell, slightly sour, slightly smoky. They burned quickly and unevenly, so families used them sparingly. A single candle might last 2 nights if they were careful. Most of the time, they slept in near total darkness. But darkness brought a strange kind of comfort. Without sights to distract them, people focused on sounds, the comforting softness of breathing, the faint scrapes of straw, the muffled crackling from the fireplace. These small sounds became part of the nighttime routine, the same way essential oils or white noise machines help people sleep today. Sleep was not a luxury, it was survival. And these tiny comforts mattered. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped further. The cold made joints ache, and many adults suffered from arthritis or stiffness. To ease this, they slept curled up for warmth. Straightening one's legs fully was often too cold. Children sleeping between adults kept the center warm, creating a natural gradient of heat, the adults shielding the younger ones. And when a baby was born in winter, survival became even more challenging. Mothers kept newborns wrapped in multiple layers of cloth, often sleeping upright while holding the baby against their chests so that their own body heat kept the child alive. Many medieval lullabies spoke quietly about keeping the child warm because warmth was life itself. Occasionally, in the middle of the night, someone would wake to add twigs or small sticks to the fire. The cold made the smallest tasks feel monumental. Touching cold wood was painful. But they did it every night, because letting the fire go out entirely meant waking to a freezing cottage at dawn. It could take an hour just to warm the room enough to breathe comfortably. So every ember mattered. Another trick the poor used involved layering. Not modern layering of clothes, but layering of bedding. A bottom layer of straw. On top of that, a layer of old rags. Then a layer of coarse wool. Then, if they were lucky, an animal hide, sheepskin, goatskin, or deer hide if they lived near forests. The hide was heavy and helped trap heat. Even though some hides stiffened in the cold, once warmed by body heat they softened and created a cocoon. The texture of medieval bedding was rough. Straw pricked the skin. Wool scratched. Animal hides smelled faintly of the outdoors. But together they formed a barrier between the cold night and the sleeping body. And over time, characters and villages grew attached to these textures. They recognized their bedding by touch alone. A child could find their favorite patch of worn cloth in complete darkness. The nights were also shaped by the sounds outside. Wolves howling in the distance were common in many regions. Dogs barked at unseen creatures. Snow slipped off thatched roofs with a soft thump, startling light sleepers. Wind whistled high-pitched through the roof beams. Sometimes, when the cold was extreme, the wood of the house cracked loudly as it expanded and contracted. These noises could frighten children, but parents calmed them by whispering that the house was simply talking to the cold. People also believed that the night was filled with unseen forces. Spirits, both kind and unkind, moved through the dark. Many families carved small wooden charms or hung herbs above their beds, lavender, rosemary, or rue, to protect themselves during sleep. Even if the herbs had no true effect on warmth, they offered psychological comfort. Sleep felt safer when guarded by something familiar. As the hours passed, bodies warmed the small space. Even though the heat was faint, it was enough to create a microclimate beneath the blankets. The outside world froze, but under that patchwork of cloth and straw, a fragile warmth clung to the skin. Dreams in medieval winters were often shaped by the cold. People dreamed of fires, of feasts, of summer fields. Hunger and cold seeped into their subconscious, weaving dreams that were both comforting and longing. Sometimes they dreamed of walking through warm sunlight only to wake shivering, breathing out frost. Yet despite all this, sleep was a refuge. A pause from the hardships of daily life. Many poor worked from dawn to dusk, whether as farmers, shepherds, carpenters, or household laborers. Night was their only escape. Even if the cold wrapped around them like a silent chain, the stillness of night offered peace. In larger medieval towns, the poor lived differently. Houses were closer together, and shared heat from neighboring buildings made winter nights slightly easier. But even then, sleeping arrangements were crowded. A single small room might hold an entire family along with visiting relatives. Privacy did not exist. Sleep was communal. People slept shoulder to shoulder, foot to foot, in whatever space they could find. The warmth of so many bodies together created a strange comfort, an unspoken understanding that survival was a shared task. And always, people listened for morning. The faintest hint of light creeping through the shutter cracks signaled the end of the long cold. But dawn did not bring immediate relief. The coldest air lingered. Families rose slowly, stretching stiff bodies, brushing frost from their blankets, rubbing their hands together to bring life back into numb fingers. Still, there was gratitude in waking. Another night survived. Another winter day faced with quiet determination. As winter dragged on, the nights seemed endless. The darkness stretched across the sky like a heavy blanket, and poor families counted time not by hours but by the rhythm of chores and the soft rise and fall of breathing in the room. When someone awoke in the middle of the night, they often listened quietly to the sounds around them, a soft cough from an elder, the gentle murmur of children dreaming, the occasional shifting of animals in the adjoining space. These faint noises reassured them that life continued, that warmth still lingered where bodies lay close together. For those living in the countryside, the cold was especially sharp. Fields lay barren. The earth, hard as stone, offered no comfort, and the wind from the hills cut like a blade. Poor farmers, weary from days spent mending broken fences or feeding hungry animals, would collapse onto their straw pallets with an exhausted heaviness. Sleep came quickly, as their bodies demanded rest. Yet even in sleep, the cold crept into their bones, making them curl tighter, seeking warmth from the nearest body. Animals inside the cottage played a larger role than mere warmth. Their breathing, steady and rhythmic, added to the sense of life within the small space. A cow's slow exhale, a sheep's soft bleat, or the occasional fluttering of a chicken, these sounds became a natural lullaby. In the medieval world, animals were companions of survival. Their presence made the freezing night feel less empty. In villages where winters were especially cruel, some families practiced a nightly ritual of banking the fire, a method where they covered the glowing embers with ash to keep them smoldering longer. This allowed the fire to stay alive through the night without wasting precious wood. When the room was nearly dark, with only tiny red glimmers breathing under the ash, families felt safe knowing that warmth could be revived at dawn. They slept knowing their survival depended on these fragile sparks. Yet not every night was peaceful. Some nights storms raged outside. Winds howled fiercely, shaking the flimsy walls and roof. Snow piled up against the door so heavily that opening it by morning became a struggle. Children clung to their parents, frightened by the booming noises of branches snapping in the forest, or the eerie whistling of winds slipping through cracks. In those moments, parents whispered calming words, telling tales of winter spirits who guarded the village, turning the storm into something mystical rather than terrifying. The stories passed down through generations were a key part of winter nights. Storytelling filled the dark spaces where warmth could not reach. Tales of heroes who braved icy mountains, of saints who walked through blizzards with light surrounding them, of villagers long gone who faced winters far harsher than the present one. These stories were shared over and over, each telling slightly different, shaped by the voice of the storyteller. The stories bound families together, creating a comfort that blankets alone could not offer. Sometimes, when the cold grew unbearable, families added more layers to their bedding. They used everything they owned, old cloaks, worn tunics, pieces of sackcloth, even sacks that once carried grain. Clothing was precious. Most poor people owned only one or two sets, so garments served multiple purposes. A cloak worn during the day became a blanket at night. A patched tunic became padding beneath the straw. Every thread mattered. Every scrap had value. There were nights when the cold seeped so deeply that sleep came in short bursts. People woke frequently, shivering, teeth chattering. On such nights, they pressed closer together, even overlapping limbs, creating a dense tangle of shared warmth. Personal space did not exist. Survival erased the idea entirely. To live through the night meant embracing closeness, trusting that the warmth of another body could keep death from creeping in through the walls. In some places, especially in mountainous regions, people slept with heated bricks. They placed flat stones in the fire until they became hot, then wrapped them in thick cloth to avoid burns. These makeshift heaters were placed near the feet, where warmth was most desperately needed. Children often fought over them, and parents decided who needed the heat most, usually the youngest or the weakest. This simple tool made a world of difference, turning a freezing night into something tolerable. When food was scarce, sleep became more difficult. Hunger sharpened the cold. A growling stomach made the night feel longer. Many poor families relied on winter stores, dried beans, preserved meat, salted fish, or hard bread. But even these ran low in the deepest months of winter. On such nights, people went to bed earlier, wrapping themselves tightly, hoping to sleep away the hunger. The warmth of sleep became a kind of refuge, a place where suffering paused for a few hours. Over time, people grew accustomed to winter's grip. They developed small habits that helped them sleep better. Some placed dried herbs under their bedding, not for warmth but for the smell. Lavender or mint, when available, brought a soothing scent. Others slept near earthen jugs filled with warm water, though the warmth didn't last long. Some whispered blessings before sleep, asking for protection against the night's cold. Despite the harshness of winter, there was a beauty to these nights. The moonlight, filtered through cracks in the shutters, cast soft silver shapes on the walls. The silence outside was profound, broken only by distant animal calls or the shifting of snow. In towns, faint sounds of guards walking the streets echoed through narrow alleys. In villages, the world felt vast and empty, but comforting in its stillness. As families drifted deeper into sleep, the cold became something distant, softened by dreams. And though the nights were long, sleep offered a sanctuary where worries melted, where the world outside held no weight, where warmth existed in memory even if not in reality. When dawn approached, the darkness slowly faded. The first hint of blue in the sky signaled that another night had passed. People stirred beneath their layers of cloth and straw. The coldest moment of the night arrived just before sunrise, making it hard to rise. But rise they did. Life required it. The fire needed feeding. Animals needed care. And work waited, as it always did. Still, each morning carried a quiet triumph. Another night survived. Another step through winter's long shadow. And no more cold nights waited ahead. People faced them with the same resilience, the same quiet courage, the same simple rituals that had carried their ancestors through centuries. As winter deepened further, the nights seemed to tighten around the small medieval cottages like a fist. The cold no longer felt like simple weather, it felt like a presence, silent, watchful, patient. People spoke about the cold as if it were alive, whispering that it crept under doors or perched on rooftops, waiting for darkness to swallow the last bit of warmth. And though these ideas belong partly to superstition, partly to experience, the truth was that cold shaped every aspect of their lives. By the middle of winter, families settled into a familiar pattern. They rose with the pale morning light, worked through the dim day, and gathered before the fire as soon as the sun fell. The long evenings were quiet, as many people spent them conserving energy. After the last chores were done, feeding animals, mending tools, sweeping the dirt floor, they prepared for the night. This preparation became a ritual repeated night after night. One of the most important tasks before sleep was tending the embers. Someone, usually the father or the eldest child, crouched near the fireplace and used a small iron or wooden stick to rearrange the glowing coals. They gently pushed the embers together, creating a compact cluster that would burn more slowly. This careful banking of the fire took practice, and the poorest families became experts at stretching the life of each ember. Wood was too precious to waste. If a family had managed to gather even a few extra logs before winter, they guarded them like treasure. When the embers were ready, the family dimmed the lights. Tallow candles were blown out quickly, too expensive to let burn long. Darkness filled the room, broken only by the faint red glow coming from the hearth. That glow, small and fragile, was enough to comfort them. It made shadows move softly along the walls like gentle waves. Inside that darkness, people whispered. Harsh voices felt wrong at night, so even adults spoke quietly. Children asked small questions. Would the snow melt soon? Would the animals stay warm? Would there be enough food until spring? Parents answered with soft reassurance. Sometimes the answers were hopeful, sometimes they were not. But the tone was always calm, meant to settle the heart before sleep. When it came time to lie down, everyone found their place. In the poorest cottages, there was no bed frame, just a raised pile of straw and cloth. The sound of settling into this bedding was familiar, the rustling of straw, the shifting of wool, the small creaks from the wooden floor beneath. People knew exactly where they liked to sleep. A mother might tuck her child close to her side. An elder might curl near the wall where it was slightly less drafty. The youngest children always slept in the warmest center, tucked between adults like small birds sheltered by larger wings. The cold made everything slow. Pulling a blanket over oneself required steady movements to avoid letting in too much air. People wrapped themselves tightly, leaving only a small space for breathing. They often kept their hands tucked under the layers, saving warmth for their fingers. Some wrapped their feet in leftover cloth or old leather, anything to keep the cold from biting too deeply. In many places, the night brought strange sounds that drifted through the village. Snow settling on roofs made soft thuds. Icicles cracked as temperatures shifted. Occasionally, the distant howl of wolves echoed through valleys, traveling across frozen fields and reaching even the smallest huts. These sounds were part of winter life, sometimes frightening, sometimes beautiful, always present. But people became used to them. A child might press their ear to the bedding, listening as the world outside whispered its cold stories. Inside, human sounds softened. The room filled with the gentle breathing of many bodies. A baby fussed quietly before settling. Someone coughed, cleared their throat, or turned over, rustling the straw. These sounds blended into a single harmony, one that signaled safety. As long as these sounds continued, the night felt manageable. But there were moments when the cold cut harshly through the room. A sudden gust of wind might push through a poorly sealed wall. A child might wake shivering, and a parent would instinctively pull them closer. Sometimes the fire's embers dimmed faster than expected, plunging the room into deeper darkness. In these moments, adults rose silently to tend the fire again. They knew that saving warmth was worth losing a few minutes of sleep. Dreams carried their own weight during these nights. People dreamed of summer meadows, of warm sunlight on their backs, of rivers flowing freely without ice. They dreamed of laughter, of feasts, of the familiar smells of fresh bread or cooking vegetables. The contrast between dream warmth and waking cold made the mornings bittersweet. But for a few hours each night, the mind escaped the winter. The cold taught them patience. It taught them to move slowly, to speak softly, to live in rhythm with the world outside. It shaped their habits, their expectations, and even their beliefs. Many believe that winter taught the soul humility, that suffering under nature's weight made one stronger, wiser, and more grateful when spring returned. Some families prayed before sleep. Their prayers were simple. They asked for warmth, for health, for enough food to last the season. They asked for protection from sickness, for a safe passage through the long night. Religion and survival walked hand in hand in the medieval world. The cold reminded them constantly of their fragility, and prayer gave them strength. Hours passed quietly as families breathed beneath their blankets, sharing warmth in the dark. The night outside deepened, spreading a heavy silence across the land. Snow fell softly, unnoticed. Animals curled tightly in their stalls. The earth itself seemed to sleep. And inside those small cottages, the poor, despite hardship, hunger, fear, and cold, found moments of peace. Sleep wrapped them gently, offering a brief escape from the relentless winter. Their dreams softened reality. Their closeness warmed their bodies. Their resilience carried them through each frozen hour. When dawn finally touched the sky with pale blue light, the world stirred once more. Frost coated the inside of windows. The air stung like needles. But the families rose, breathing clouds of white into the cold morning, ready to begin another day of survival. Yet beneath all that struggle lay something quiet and profound, the ability to endure. To sleep in the freezing dark. To wake and continue. To face winter not with comfort, but with courage. As the night deepened, the cold inside those medieval cottages seemed to thicken like invisible smoke. The poor, who had no luxury of heated stone halls or feather-lined beds, relied instead on something far more ancient: body heat, patience, and an understanding that winter was not just a season, but an opponent. Sometimes they whispered that the cold had a personality of its own, creeping through the cracks, licking at their ankles, testing the strength of their resolve. And in those moments, as the wind pushed against the wooden shutters, families instinctively moved closer, pulling wool blankets tighter, their breaths forming tiny clouds that hovered for a second before dissolving into the darkness. In many homes, the floor itself was cold enough to numb the skin, so people piled straw, dry, rustling, and carrying the earthy scent of summer fields. They spread it across the ground and layered old cloths or tattered blankets on top to create a sleeping space that trapped as much warmth as possible. Children often burrowed deep into the straw, their tiny bodies disappearing beneath the layers like small animals hiding from predators. The straw crackled softly with every movement, becoming the closest thing they had to a mattress. And even though the straw poked and pricked, it also insulated better than any thin linen sheet could. Some families even slept sitting up, propped against the wall or against each other, because lying down flat sometimes made the cold settle more heavily on the body. The upright posture allowed cloaks to drape like tents over the knees, creating pockets of warm air that felt precious. It wasn't comfortable, but it was warmer, and in winter comfort was a luxury few dared to dream about. The nights were long, so long that people often split their sleep into two segments, waking in the middle of the night to feed the fire, check the shutters, or simply to rub warmth back into their limbs. When the fire burned low, and the embers pulsed a faint red like the last heartbeat of a dying creature, someone would rise to add more wood, if there was any left. Poor families rationed firewood with the precision of a general rationing food during a siege. Every piece thrown into the flames was a decision. Some nights they burned dried animal dung instead, which smelled harsh and bitter but produced just enough heat to keep frost from forming on the inside of the walls. The smell lingered in their hair, their clothes, even their dreams, but in winter survival mattered more than scent. Parents often positioned their children closest to the remaining warmth, whether from the fire, from animals, or from each other. Adults, hardened by experience and the knowledge of their responsibilities, took the coldest spots. They pressed their backs to the walls to block drafts, while the children slept nestled at the center, shielded by a circle of bodies acting as a human barrier against the icy air. It was an unspoken rule, passed down through generations, a quiet testament to sacrifice. And still, the cold found them. It slithered around the chimney stones, seeped through unsealed thatch, and wrapped itself around fingers and toes. In the deepest hours of the night, people woke not because of noise or nightmares, but because the cold itself had become a presence, sharp, urgent, demanding attention. They rubbed their hands together, blew warm breath into their cupped palms, or tucked their feet beneath someone else's legs. Sometimes they whispered stories just to stay awake long enough for their bodies to warm again. In many small cottages, livestock shared the living space during the coldest months. The thin wooden walls could not block the wind, and outside stalls offered no real protection. A goat or a cow brought into the home released a gentle warmth, their bodies radiating heat like living furnaces. Children often slept with their backs against the animals' sides, comforted by the slow, steady rhythm of breathing. The scent of hay, wool, and animals mixed with the smoky aroma of the hearth, creating a strange but familiar air that meant safety. To poor families, animals were not just sources of milk or labor, they were part of the winter survival strategy. Sometimes families slept wrapped in their few pieces of clothing, wearing wool tunics, cloaks, and even boots to bed. Removing clothing at night was unthinkable when temperatures dropped below freezing. The layers stayed on day and night, trapping body heat and keeping frostbite at bay. In regions where winters were brutally long, people even shared beds with neighbors or extended family members. Privacy meant nothing, warmth was everything. The closeness of bodies, the mingled breaths, the shared blankets created an intimacy that was less romantic and more primal, a communal fight against the cold. Outside, the world was silent, blanketed in snow that muffled every sound. But inside the cottages, the night was alive with tiny noises, the rustling of straw, the shifting of blankets, the crackling of the dying fire. Sleep was not deep or peaceful. It was fragmented, cautious, and shaped by the rhythm of survival. Every creak of the shutters or gust of wind reminded people that nature was watching them closely. And yet, somehow, they slept. Not because it was comfortable, but because exhaustion demanded it. As the long winter nights stretched on, families became attuned to the smallest changes in the air. A subtle draft from a crack in the wall, the faint scent of smoke, or the movement of animals in their corner could awaken even the heaviest sleeper. The cold was relentless, seeping into joints, stiffening limbs, and making the simple act of turning over in bed a careful, deliberate movement. People learned to anticipate it, adjusting blankets, moving closer together, or huddling nearer to the residual warmth of the embers. Every motion was measured, every breath counted. In villages where snow piled high, rooftops sagged under the weight, and icicles hung like fragile daggers along the eaves. The wind rattled doors and tossed loose thatch, creating a constant background hum. In such conditions, families relied on ritual as much as strategy. The ritual of sleep involved preparing the fire, layering straw and cloth, positioning the children, adjusting clothing, and finally lying down in a coordinated dance of warmth preservation. This repetition became second nature, a rhythm that carried them through months of darkness and frost. Children, especially, learned early the art of enduring the cold. They understood instinctively where to place their hands and feet, how to keep their heads covered, and how to breathe in a way that preserved warmth. Many slept partially upright against a parent, or leaned into a sibling, using body heat like a shield. Their small movements were minimized to prevent drafts from seeping in, and they became acutely aware of the heat radiating from nearby bodies. In this shared struggle, even the youngest were participants in a nightly strategy that balanced survival with rest. Food, or the scarcity of it, shaped winter sleep profoundly. Families that had managed to store even modest supplies of grains, dried vegetables, or salted meat felt a sense of security that eased the mind at bedtime. Hunger, however, was a relentless companion for the poorest. When bellies were empty, the cold felt sharper, the night longer. Parents often went without food themselves, sharing their meager portions with children, relying on the warmth of presence rather than sustenance to carry through the night. Sleep in these conditions was sometimes brief, shallow, punctuated by dreams of warmth, fire, and summer fields. Prayer and superstition were also intertwined with the act of sleeping. People whispered blessings before sleep, asking for protection from the cold, from illness, or from wandering spirits believed to roam the dark. Herbs, charms, or simple symbols drawn on walls near beds were meant to guard against invisible dangers. Even if these rituals had no direct effect on physical warmth, they provided mental comfort, reducing anxiety and making sleep more attainable. In medieval thought, spiritual protection and physical endurance went hand in hand. Sometimes, a household's survival depended on improvisation. Stones or bricks were heated in the fire and wrapped in cloth to act as bed warmers. If a storm threatened the structural integrity of a hut, extra straw was added to the walls or roof, or heavier cloths were draped over openings. The poorest improvised constantly, turning whatever was at hand, old clothing, sacks, broken furniture, into a tool for warmth. This ingenuity was a silent hero of winter nights, a skill passed down through generations. The soundscape of the night was subtle yet alive. The crackling of the dying fire, the soft murmur of an animal shifting in its straw, the faint groan of wooden beams contracting under frost, all combined into a rhythm of existence. Even the occasional howl of a distant wolf was part of the fabric of nighttime. People learned to sleep alongside these sounds, integrating them into a subconscious understanding of their environment. The night was not empty, it was filled with life, in a form that modern ears might barely notice. Sleep itself was a fluid state, broken by necessary awakenings. Sometimes a child cried from cold or hunger. Sometimes someone needed to stoke the embers before they died completely. Even during these moments, movement was careful, quiet, deliberate. Every sound risked disturbing others, every action threatened to let warmth escape. And yet life demanded vigilance. The balance between sleep and survival was a delicate one, practiced nightly by all in the household. Despite all the hardships, there was a strange peace in these long winter nights. The world slowed. Time became measured not by clocks but by the rhythm of fire, breath, and the rising sun. The constant battle with cold fostered intimacy, patience, and attention to detail. Families grew closer, children learned resilience, and adults practiced quiet endurance. Winter nights, harsh as they were, became a canvas on which generations painted their survival, their care, and their hope. And so the cold hours passed, minute by minute, breath by breath, until finally the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon. Frost clung to the inside of windows, the fire smoldered faintly, and the day's labor awaited. Families rose slowly, carrying with them the memory of the night's warmth, small victories in the endless struggle with winter. Each morning was both relief and preparation for the next dark, cold night, a rhythm as old as human endurance itself. Through the long, frozen nights, poor families developed a kind of sixth sense for survival. They could sense when the wind shifted direction, when the temperature would drop further, and when the fire required urgent attention. Every small sound, an icicle cracking on the roof, a loose shutter rattling, or the faint movement of animals, was a signal, a cue to act. This awareness was not frightening, rather, it became part of the rhythm of their lives, a pattern as familiar as the rising and setting of the sun. The relationship with the animals in the household was particularly intimate during these months. Goats, sheep, and even pigs shared the cramped living space, providing heat, companionship, and reassurance. People learned to read the subtle cues of their movements, the shuffle of a hoof in straw, the gentle snort, the rustle of wool. The animals became indicators of the household's overall warmth. If they shifted restlessly, it meant cold was creeping in. If they were calm, the heat was sufficient. Families responded accordingly, adjusting blankets, adding straw, or moving closer together. Clothing at night was never discarded. Woolen tunics, patched cloaks, thick socks, and even hoods stayed on, layered as carefully as armor against the cold. People discovered that the warmth of shared body heat was magnified when clothing was worn, trapping heat in pockets between bodies. Children often wore several layers, sometimes sleeping upright against adults or burrowing between siblings. Comfort was secondary, survival was the goal. But in this relentless fight, a certain quiet intimacy emerged, a sense of trust and protection among those who shared the same sleeping space. Fire remained the centerpiece of winter nights. The ritual of tending it was woven into the fabric of life. Someone would rise in the dark to gently stir embers, add a small piece of wood, and bank the flames to last through the night. The warmth from this careful maintenance radiated slowly, reaching each corner of the small room. Families learned to conserve heat, to avoid drafts, and to make each ember count. Fire was both a lifeline and a companion, a faint heartbeat against the cold and darkness. Hunger and scarcity influenced sleep as well. Some nights, the stomach's growl was loud enough to pull one from slumber. Families rationed what little food they had, often sacrificing their own portions for children. A bowl of watery broth or a piece of stale bread became a nightly ritual, offering not only minimal sustenance but psychological comfort. The warmth of shared food before sleep helped prepare the body for the cold hours ahead. Even when meager, these small gestures created a sense of security. The segmented sleep pattern, known as first and second sleep, dictated nightly routines. People went to bed shortly after sunset, slept for a few hours, and then awoke for a brief period. During this waking time, they might tend the fire, whisper prayers, check on children, or share quiet conversation. This practice was both practical and natural. It allowed humans to respond to the long hours of darkness, the persistent cold, and the needs of both family and animals. Second sleep followed, carrying people gently into the morning hours. Stories and superstition played a crucial role in the mental landscape of winter nights. Families whispered tales of spirits, protective charms, or long-dead ancestors who watched over the household. Herbs such as rosemary, sage, or lavender were placed under straw or tied above sleeping spaces to ward off evil or illness. While these practices offered no physical warmth, they gave psychological reassurance, a sense of control in a world dominated by freezing temperatures. Sleep became not just a physical act, but a spiritual and emotional one as well. Dreams during these nights often reflected the harsh reality of life. People dreamt of summer fields, of crops that might fail or thrive, of warmth that seemed distant. Hunger and fatigue crept into dreams, creating images of both longing and hope. Yet sleep was a refuge. Even fragmented, even interrupted, it provided a necessary pause, a momentary escape from relentless labor and bitter cold. Morning came slowly. The first light revealed frost clinging to walls, thin layers of ice on the inside of windows, and a household still wrapped in the lingering chill of the night. Families rose deliberately, stretching stiff limbs, rubbing hands and faces to bring warmth back into circulation. The fire, carefully banked the night before, was rekindled. Breakfast, however meager, was shared. Work awaited immediately, feeding animals, preparing fields, repairing tools, but within the brief moments of waking, there was gratitude. Another night had been survived. Another victory over winter had been won. The cold did not merely exist outside, it permeated everything. It entered through the gaps in walls, the thin thatch of the roof, and even the spaces between the boards of the floor. In response, people developed subtle techniques to retain warmth. They positioned themselves strategically, layering bodies, blankets, and clothing in a carefully arranged hierarchy of heat. Parents often took the coldest spots near windows or walls, using their own bodies as shields for children. Even within these small spaces, a careful balance of proximity was necessary. Too close, and movement disturbed others. Too far, and warmth was lost. Survival demanded precision, even in sleep. Animals continued to play a vital role in winter nights. Cows, goats, and sometimes pigs remained in the main living quarters, adding warmth through their bodies and soft, rhythmic breathing. Families learned to recognize their patterns. The gentle shift of a goat indicated discomfort. A small movement in a cow's body could signal cold, and the soft grunts of pigs reassured that life persisted. These creatures were not just animals. They were co-guardians of warmth, integral to the household's survival strategy. The fire, though small, remained the heart of the home. Its faint glow was enough to illuminate shapes and shadows, enough to calm restless children and provide a psychological anchor in the darkness. The ritual of tending the fire involved careful judgment. Too much wood, and it would burn too quickly, leaving nothing for the night's long hours. Too little, and cold would infiltrate the room before dawn. This delicate balance was a nightly test of patience and skill, mastered over years of experience. Hunger shaped not only sleep but also the atmosphere of the room. When food was scarce, the household moved with extra care. Movement generated heat, but also risked letting the warmth escape. Parents rationed food carefully, offering the smallest portions to those who needed it most. Sometimes a small bowl of thin broth was all that separated warmth from chill. Even these meager meals carried comfort. the sensation of fullness, however temporary, and the psychological reassurance that another night could be endured. Segmentation of sleep continued to be important. People slept in shifts dictated by the cold and their needs. First sleep occurred soon after dusk, allowing the body to rest after a day of labor. Then came the brief waking period in the dead of night. During this time, families would tend to fires, whisper prayers, check children, or engage in quiet conversation. This middle period was vital. It allowed adjustment to the cold and reinforcement of warmth before second sleep carried them toward morning. Storytelling and superstition shaped mental resilience. Tales of ancestors, spirits, and protective charms filled the dark hours, providing psychological warmth even when the physical world was bitter. Herbs placed under straw or tied above beds offered a sense of control, reducing fear of unknown dangers in the long night. Children listened, enraptured, absorbing both the narratives and the implicit lessons of caution, patience, and endurance. Sleep became not just an act of rest but a continuation of cultural knowledge. Dreams reflected the harshness and the hope of life. People often dreamed of summer warmth, abundant food, and safe, bright days. These dreams provided a temporary escape, a mental sanctuary where the cold of the night could not reach them. Even fragmented or interrupted, these moments of subconscious warmth carried strength into waking hours, reinforcing the subtle resilience built over centuries of enduring winter. With the approach of dawn, households slowly stirred. Frost clung to windows and walls, ice formed where gaps were greatest. People rose deliberately, rubbing stiffened limbs and warming hands and feet against each other. Fires, carefully tended through the night, were coaxed back to full flame. Breakfast was simple, often just a small portion of bread or broth, yet it carried profound significance: energy for labor, warmth for the body, and reassurance that life persisted. The morning was a brief triumph, a reward for surviving the long night. Yet it was also preparation. The cold hours of the next night awaited, and the cycle would begin again. Children learned patience and endurance. Adults refined the arts of survival, tending fire, animals, and family with careful attention. Every night was a test, and every morning a reaffirmation of resilience. Winter, though harsh and relentless, was lived with courage, strategy, and the quiet dignity of those who faced it every day. As the weeks of winter passed, families grew intimately familiar with the subtleties of cold. They could sense the faintest chill before it entered the room, the slow drift of frost along the walls, or the whisper of wind through the roof. These signals were vital. They dictated when to add more straw, when to adjust blankets, and when to move children closer for warmth. Awareness became instinct. Every sound, every movement, every breath was part of a delicate negotiation with the cold. Survival was not accidental. It was carefully managed, hour by hour, night by night. Children developed an acute sensitivity to the environment. They learned which areas of the cottage remained warmer, which corners were drafty, and how to position themselves for maximum comfort. Many slept curled up tightly against parents or siblings, creating a living heat source that allowed the smallest among them to endure the night. The adults, taking the coldest spots, silently bore discomfort so that children could have relative warmth. These unspoken routines were acts of love and practicality, intertwined with the very essence of survival. Animals continued to be indispensable companions. Goats, sheep, and sometimes pigs shared the living space, their bodies radiating heat into the cramped room. The sound of their breathing, soft and rhythmic, offered reassurance. Families learned to respond to their subtle movements, adjusting positions, shifting blankets, or adding layers of straw to protect them from drafts. Animals were not merely a source of warmth. They were living indicators, part of the nightly strategy that kept the household alive. Fire remained the core of nighttime survival. Tending it was both art and necessity. A poorly managed fire could leave a family vulnerable to frost by dawn, while careful attention ensured warmth that lasted through the long hours. Wood, precious and scarce, was rationed meticulously. Families used every ember wisely, sometimes supplementing with dried dung or old scraps of wood when supplies ran low. The ritual of fire maintenance, repeated nightly, became an instinctive act of endurance and hope. Hunger shaped the experience of winter profoundly. Families ate sparingly, often saving their meager stores for the most vulnerable. The simple act of consuming a small portion of bread, broth, or dried food before sleep was both sustenance and psychological comfort. Even when food was minimal, the warmth of shared space, clothing, and fire combined to create a fragile but crucial sense of safety. Sleep was segmented and strategic. The first sleep began shortly after sunset, offering the body needed rest. A period of waking in the dead of night allowed tending of the fire, quiet conversation, prayer, and repositioning for warmth. Then came second sleep, carrying individuals toward dawn. This pattern was both natural and practical, ensuring that survival was reinforced during the most dangerous, coldest hours. Each night, this cycle repeated, embedding itself into the rhythm of life. Stories and superstition remained central to the mental landscape of winter. Tales of spirits, ancestors, and protective charms offered comfort in the darkness. Herbs placed beneath straw or above sleeping spaces were believed to guard against evil or illness. These small acts, though symbolic, had real effects. They eased fear, fostered patience, and allowed people to sleep more soundly. Storytelling, in particular, created communal bonds, soothing children and adults alike, while reinforcing cultural knowledge and survival strategies. Dreams carried echoes of reality and hope. Individuals dreamt of warmth, of summer sunlight, of abundant food and safe days. Hunger, fatigue, and cold sometimes bled into dreams, creating scenarios that combined longing and resilience. These nightly visions provided a mental reprieve, a subtle form of nourishment for the mind, preparing people to face the next long, frozen night with renewed determination. Dawn brought both relief and preparation. The first light illuminated frost-laden windows and icy floors. People rose deliberately, stretching stiff limbs, rubbing hands and feet to awaken circulation. Fires, carefully maintained through the night, were brought back to life. Breakfast, often minimal, provided the necessary energy for labor and movement. And yet, in these early hours, there was gratitude. Another night survived, another day of endurance awaiting. Winter nights, though harsh, were thus lived with strategy, patience, and resilience. Every family developed intimate knowledge of their environment, their bodies, and each other. Every ember, every straw layer, every shared blanket was a testament to their ingenuity. And through it all, the poorest in the Middle Ages endured, rested, and survived, not because the world was kind, but because they had learned the quiet art of living with cold. As the nights of winter pressed on, the rhythm of survival became ingrained in every household. Families rose, moved, and slept according to the cold rather than the sun. The body adapted to the long hours of darkness and frost, developing instincts that guided even the youngest children. They could sense subtle shifts in temperature, the faint whistle of wind through a crack, or the diminishing glow of embers. Every detail mattered. Every breath, every shuffle, every whispered movement was calibrated to retain warmth and conserve energy. Children often became experts in the art of curling for heat. They learned how to nestle close to a sibling or parent, which position trapped the most warmth, and how to move without disturbing the delicate balance that kept the household from freezing. Parents silently bore the discomfort of drafty walls or exposed floors, trusting that their own bodies would shield the young. This pattern of shared endurance created bonds deeper than mere family ties. It was a collective strategy of survival, an unspoken promise of protection and care. Animals remained central to winter survival. Livestock brought into the living quarters radiated gentle warmth and contributed to the household's rhythm. Their breathing, soft and constant, became a lullaby of sorts, calming children and reminding adults that life persisted even in harsh conditions. Families observed the subtle signals of their animals, shifts in weight, small movements, soft sounds, and responded, adjusting positions, adding straw, or protecting them from drafts. In many ways, animals were both companions and sentinels, integral to enduring the cold. The fire was both lifeline and ritual. Embers carefully banked the night before were gently stirred to maintain heat without wasting wood. Each movement of coals, each addition of a small branch, required precision. A poorly managed fire could leave the household vulnerable to frost before dawn. A carefully tended one provided hours of warmth and security. Families learned the art of patience and foresight through this nightly ritual, turning a small hearth into a central axis of life. Food, or its scarcity, profoundly shaped the night. The meager portions eaten before sleep, often just a thin broth or a piece of bread, carried importance far beyond nutrition. They offered psychological reassurance, signaling that the body could endure until morning. Hunger intensified the perception of cold, making sleep restless and fragmented. Parents often sacrificed their portions so children could rest with at least a semblance of fullness, reinforcing bonds of care and resilience. Segmented sleep remained essential. First sleep followed dusk, bringing initial rest after the day's labors. A brief awakening in the middle of the night allowed tending of the fire, repositioning for warmth, prayers, or quiet conversation. Second sleep carried the household toward dawn. This cyclical pattern was not merely habit, it was survival. Each night embedded these routines deeper into the rhythm of life, creating instincts that guided action even under the heaviest frost. Superstition and storytelling provided mental warmth. Families whispered tales of protective spirits, past ancestors, and magical wards that safeguarded against winter's perils. Herbs placed beneath straw, charms hung near sleeping areas, or symbols etched into walls offered reassurance. These acts, while symbolic, strengthened mental endurance, reduced fear, and made sleep more achievable. Stories also nurtured cultural memory, transmitting knowledge of survival, caution, and resilience to the next generation. Dreams offered another form of escape. People envisioned summer, warmth, abundant food, and safe days. Even in fragmented sleep, these dreams provided a subtle nourishment for the mind, reminding sleepers of seasons beyond the cold. Dreams allowed the imagination to temporarily transcend frost and hunger, reinforcing endurance in ways both practical and spiritual. When dawn finally appeared, light spread across frosted panes, revealing ice on floors and walls. Families stirred, stretching stiff limbs and rubbing hands and feet to restore circulation. Fires banked during the night glowed again, offering welcome heat. Breakfast, often modest, provided the energy for immediate tasks, tending animals, preparing food, or repairing tools. Yet within these early moments, gratitude lingered. Another night had been survived. Another day of endurance awaited. Winter nights, though bitter and relentless, were a time of learning, adaptation, and intimate connection. Every ember, layer of straw, and shared blanket told a story of resilience. Every whispered story, carefully placed herb, and human-animal bond reinforced the quiet strategies that kept life going. In this unending struggle against cold, the poor of the Middle Ages discovered not comfort, but survival, patience, and a profound capacity to endure. As the nights grew longer and the frost deeper, families became intimately aware of the delicate interplay between warmth and cold. Every breath, every movement, and every shift in the room carried significance. Adults instinctively positioned themselves to protect the young, sharing body heat while minimizing exposure to drafts. Children learned early to nestle, curl, and adjust themselves to extract maximum warmth without disturbing others. This constant negotiation became second nature, a silent language of survival woven into the rhythm of the night. Animals continued to provide indispensable heat and companionship. Goats, sheep, cows, and occasionally pigs, housed within the living quarters, contributed a steady radiance of warmth. Their presence offered both physical comfort and reassurance, a living heartbeat in the stillness of winter nights. Families observed subtle cues. A goat's restless shuffle signaled cold, a cow's soft exhale indicated contentment. By responding to these movements, people not only preserved their own warmth but also nurtured the animals upon which their survival often depended. The hearth remained the center of the household. Tending it required precision, patience, and awareness. A fire mismanaged could mean hours of unbearable cold before dawn. A well-maintained one provided slow, steady heat that reached every corner. Wood was scarce and valuable, so families learned to bank embers carefully, use small branches judiciously, and supplement with dried dung when necessary. The act of tending fire became a nightly ritual, a dance of endurance and foresight that ensured life persisted through the cold hours. Hunger added another layer of challenge. Meals were minimal, often thin broth or a small piece of bread, eaten before sleep to provide the faintest sustenance. Adults frequently sacrificed their portions so that children could rest more comfortably. The combination of shared warmth, sparse food, and close quarters created a fragile but vital ecosystem, balancing nourishment, heat, and comfort against the merciless winter outside. Even the smallest acts of provision and care carried immense significance. Sleep itself was highly structured. First sleep began shortly after sunset, offering initial rest. The brief period of waking, middle sleep, allowed for necessary adjustments, tending the fire, repositioning family members for warmth, quiet conversation, or whispered prayers. Second sleep then carried the household toward dawn. This segmented pattern was both instinctual and practical, honed over generations to maximize comfort, safety, and survival during the longest, coldest nights of the year. Storytelling and superstition intertwined with survival. Families whispered tales of protective spirits, vigilant ancestors, and charms meant to ward off danger. Herbs like sage, rosemary, or lavender were placed under straw or above beds, offering comfort and psychological reassurance. These practices reinforced patience, reduced fear, and enhanced the ability to sleep amidst the cold. Stories nurtured communal bonds, transmitted survival wisdom, and provided a mental refuge in a world defined by harsh winters. Dreams offered another layer of endurance. Even in brief, fragmented sleep, people imagined warmth, abundance, and safety, scenes of summer sunlight, flowing rivers, and plentiful food. These nightly visions provided solace, mental escape, and subtle reinforcement of resilience. Though the cold pressed against their bodies, the mind could wander into a temporary sanctuary, strengthening the spirit for the coming hours of hardship. When dawn approached, frost painted delicate patterns on windows, ice clung to floors, and the household stirred slowly. Stiff limbs were rubbed awake, circulation restored, and fires rekindled to chase away the residual chill. Minimal breakfast fueled labor, tending animals, repairing tools, preparing for the day. And yet, in these early moments, gratitude lingered. Surviving another night, enduring the relentless cold, was itself a quiet triumph. Each morning was both relief and preparation, a reminder of human resilience and the enduring strategies that allowed life to continue. Winter nights, though merciless and relentless, were lived with ingenuity, patience, and deep familial connection. Every ember, every layer of straw, every shared blanket represented not comfort but survival. Every whispered story, carefully placed herb, and attentive response to animals reinforced a subtle yet profound system of endurance. In these long, frozen nights, the poor of the Middle Ages discovered a quiet, intimate mastery of survival, patience, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Night after night, families became almost symbiotic with the rhythm of winter. Each individual's movement was carefully measured, every rustle of straw or cloth calculated to maintain warmth. Parents instinctively shielded the coldest corners, adjusting blankets and body positions to protect children. Children, in turn, learned early to nestle tightly, curling into the contours of parents or siblings to extract heat. This silent choreography of survival became instinctual, a nightly routine etched into muscle memory and taught without words. Animals remained silent partners in endurance. Goats, sheep, and cows housed inside radiated gentle warmth, their breathing and shifting bodies providing both physical heat and psychological comfort. Families quickly learned to interpret subtle signals from the animals, a shift in weight, a restless movement, a soft exhale, indicating discomfort, cold, or contentment. Responding to these cues ensured that both humans and animals could endure the night together, a cooperative strategy woven into the very structure of survival. The fire continued to serve as the lifeblood of the household. Each ember was precious, and tending it required skill, patience, and foresight. Families carefully banked the coals to prolong the heat, added small pieces of wood with precise timing, and occasionally supplemented with dried dung or scraps to sustain warmth. The ritual of tending fire became central to the night's routine, combining necessity with a subtle art, a nightly meditation on survival and the fragile balance between cold and warmth. Hunger and scarcity defined the nocturnal experience. Meals were often sparse, thin broth, small pieces of bread, or remnants of dried vegetables. Adults frequently sacrificed their portions to ensure children had something to eat. Even this minimal food intake provided critical psychological comfort, a signal that sustenance would last until morning. The combination of shared warmth, careful layering of clothing, and these small provisions created a delicate but effective survival system, allowing families to endure even the harshest nights. Segmented sleep remained a practical strategy. First sleep, beginning after dusk, allowed the body initial rest following a day's labor. The brief awakening of middle sleep provided opportunity to tend the fire, adjust bedding and blankets, reposition children, or engage in quiet reflection or prayer. Second sleep then carried the household through the remaining hours toward dawn. This cyclical pattern, repeated night after night, evolved as an instinctive adaptation to the long, frigid nights of winter. Superstition and storytelling intertwined with survival strategies. Families whispered tales of protective spirits, ancestral watchers, and charms meant to guard against harm. Herbs such as sage or rosemary were placed under straw or near sleeping areas, offering psychological reassurance and a sense of control in a harsh, unpredictable environment. These practices bolstered mental endurance, alleviated fear, and facilitated sleep. Stories and rituals transmitted cultural knowledge, patience, and subtle survival strategies to younger generations, embedding wisdom in the shared experience of the long night. Dreams became a form of mental escape. Even in fragmented sleep, people imagined warmth, abundance, and safety. They envisioned summer fields, flowing rivers, and plentiful food, constructing a sanctuary in the mind against the cold pressing on the body. These dreams, though fleeting, nourished the spirit, reinforcing resilience and fortifying the mental endurance needed to face each successive night. With the approach of dawn, frost glittered on windows and ice traced patterns along floors. Families stirred slowly, stretching stiffened limbs and rubbing hands and feet to restore warmth and circulation. Fires, maintained carefully through the night, glowed brighter once tended. Minimal breakfasts, often thin porridge, bread, or broth, provided energy for daily labor, feeding animals, repairing tools, or preparing for work in the fields. And yet, in those quiet morning moments, gratitude lingered. Each survived night was a victory over cold and hardship, a testament to endurance, skill, and human resilience. Winter nights, though relentless and unforgiving, were marked by ingenuity, shared effort, and deep familial bonds. Every ember carefully banked, every layer of straw, every shared blanket represented survival rather than comfort. Stories, prayers, and attentive care for animals reinforced subtle strategies that allowed families to endure. In these frozen hours, the poor of the Middle Ages discovered a quiet mastery of resilience, patience, and the art of surviving against the harshest natural conditions. As the long winter nights continued, families grew ever more attuned to the subtle cues of their environment. Every creak of the wooden beams, every shift of straw beneath a body, and every whisper of wine through the roof signaled the need for adjustment. Adults instinctively monitored these signs, repositioning themselves or children, redistributing blankets, and ensuring that heat was preserved. Children, in turn, learned early to interpret these signals, curling tightly, adjusting their breathing, and remaining still to conserve warmth. Survival was a delicate, continuous negotiation with the cold, a silent choreography carried out each night with instinctive precision. Animals continued to serve as essential companions. Goats, sheep, cows, and occasionally pigs provided warmth and reassurance through their steady body heat and rhythmic breathing. Families learned to observe subtle movements, shifts in weight, restless twitches, or soft exhalations that indicated discomfort or satisfaction. Responding appropriately ensured both the humans and animals endured the night together, reinforcing a cooperative survival system. The animals' presence, warmth, and quiet life rhythm became integral to the family's ability to face the winter. The hearth remained the beating heart of survival. Fires were carefully banked to last through the night, and coals were meticulously stirred to maintain a steady glow. Wood was precious, often rationed with great care, and sometimes replaced with dried dung or scraps when supplies were low. The act of tending the fire was a nightly ritual, requiring patience and attentiveness. The warmth from embers reached gradually, enveloping the family in a protective glow that transformed a simple cottage into a haven against the harsh frost. Hunger shaped the experience of winter profoundly. Meals were minimal, often just thin broth, a small piece of bread, or remnants of stored vegetables. Adults often sacrificed their portions for children, reinforcing bonds of care and protection. Even the smallest food offerings provided critical psychological comfort, signaling that sustenance would last until morning. Combined with shared warmth, layered clothing, and attentive care, these small acts created a fragile but essential system for enduring the cold hours. Segmented sleep continued to provide both rest and survival. First sleep, shortly after dusk, offered initial rest. A brief waking period allowed tending of the fire, adjusting bedding, repositioning children, or engaging in quiet conversation and prayer. Second sleep carried the household toward dawn, completing the nightly cycle. This segmented pattern, developed over generations, optimized the balance between rest and survival during the longest, coldest nights. Storytelling and superstition remained central to mental endurance. Families whispered tales of protective spirits, ancestral guardians, and charms designed to ward off danger. Herbs, such as sage, rosemary, or lavender, were placed beneath straw or near sleeping areas to provide psychological reassurance. These small rituals offered comfort, reduced fear, and enhanced the ability to sleep amidst the cold. Stories also transmitted wisdom and survival strategies to younger generations, embedding knowledge alongside the practical routines of winter nights. Dreams offered fleeting mental escape. Even fragmented, interrupted sleep allowed people to imagine warmth, abundant food, and safety. Scenes of summer sunlight, flowing rivers, and plentiful harvests created a sanctuary in the mind, reinforcing hope and resilience. Though the body endured frost and hunger, the mind could find temporary refuge, strengthening resolve for the long nights ahead. Dawn brought slow relief. Frost decorated windows and floors with delicate patterns, and families stirred, stretching stiffened limbs and rubbing hands and feet to restore circulation. Fires, carefully maintained through the night, were rekindled to provide morning warmth. Minimal breakfasts, often bread or thin porridge, fueled labor, tending animals, repairing tools, and preparing for work. Within these quiet morning rituals lingered gratitude and relief. Another night survived, another day of endurance ahead. Winter nights, though merciless, were defined by ingenuity, cooperation, and resilience. Every ember, layer of straw, and shared blanket represented careful planning and survival. Stories, prayers, and attentive care for animals reinforced strategies that allowed life to continue. In these long, frozen hours, the poor of the Middle Ages cultivated a profound mastery of patience, endurance, and the quiet art of surviving against nature's harshest tests. As winter deepened, families became ever more skilled at negotiating the relentless cold. Every movement, every adjustment of blankets, and every shift of position was carefully calculated. Adults instinctively protected the most vulnerable, the children and the elderly, using their own bodies as shields against drafts and icy floors. Children learned early to curl tightly against siblings or parents, drawing warmth and security from shared body heat. Survival was a nightly practice, a quiet coordination of instinct, experience, and vigilance that required little speech but immense awareness. Animals remained central to this intricate system. Cows, goats, sheep, and sometimes pigs contributed vital warmth and comfort. Their breathing, movements, and subtle shifts were signals for humans to act, adding straw, adjusting positions, or reinforcing bedding. The presence of these creatures not only provided physical heat but also emotional reassurance, a sense of life persisting through the harshest conditions. Families relied on them as part of an interdependent survival network. The hearth continued to dominate the household's nightly rhythm. Fires were tended with care, embers banked to sustain heat throughout the long night. Wood was precious, rationed carefully, and occasionally replaced with dried dung or other combustible materials. Each ember represented not just warmth but survival. The ritual of maintaining the fire required patience, attention, and skill, transforming the small hearth into a life-giving center of the home. Hunger shaped every aspect of nighttime existence. Meals were sparse, often thin broth or small portions of bread or dried vegetables. Adults frequently sacrificed their food to ensure that children had enough to endure the night. Even the smallest amounts of nourishment provided psychological comfort, easing anxieties and allowing the body to tolerate cold more effectively. Combined with layered clothing, careful positioning, and shared body heat, these small provisions formed a subtle but vital survival system. Segmented sleep remained a practical adaptation. First sleep, after dusk, allowed initial rest, followed by a brief period of waking in the middle of the night. During this time, families tended fires, adjusted blankets, repositioned children, or whispered prayers. Second sleep then carried them toward dawn. This cycle, repeated night after night, provided balance between rest and vigilance, allowing households to endure the most punishing hours of the year. Storytelling and superstition were interwoven with survival strategies. Tales of protective spirits, ancestral guardians, and charms offered psychological warmth. Herbs like rosemary, sage, and lavender were placed under straw or near sleeping areas to reduce fear and foster reassurance. These rituals, though symbolic, supported mental endurance, reinforced cultural knowledge, and strengthened familial bonds. Stories educated children in both caution and resilience, transmitting wisdom alongside practical strategies for enduring winter nights. Dreams offered a temporary reprieve from the cold. Even fragmented sleep allowed the mind to conjure visions of summer warmth, plentiful food, and safety. These fleeting mental escapes nurtured hope, providing subtle psychological reinforcement. The body might shiver, the fingers might ache, and the toes might grow numb, but the mind could wander to a sanctuary of imagined warmth, sustaining resilience for the hours yet to come. Dawn brought both relief and preparation. Frost clung to windows and floors, and families awoke slowly, stretching stiffened muscles and rubbing limbs to restore circulation. Fires, maintained carefully through the night, were rekindled to provide warmth. Simple breakfasts, porridge, bread, or broth, fueled the day's labor, tending animals, repairing tools, or preparing fields. Within these early morning rituals lingered a quiet gratitude. Surviving another night of relentless cold was itself an accomplishment, a testament to ingenuity, endurance, and human resilience. Winter nights, harsh and unyielding, were survived through a combination of strategy, cooperation, and careful attention to detail. Each ember, layer of straw, and shared blanket represented calculated effort and care. Stories, prayers, and attentive management of animals reinforced survival strategies. In these frozen hours, the poor of the Middle Ages cultivated a profound mastery of endurance, patience, and the quiet art of living in harmony with the harshest elements of nature. Night after night, the rhythm of survival became deeply ingrained. Every family member instinctively knew when to adjust their position, how to share warmth efficiently, and when to tend the fire for maximum effect. Parents silently bore the coldest spots, shielding children and elderly members, while the young curled tightly to absorb heat. Every movement was deliberate, every breath measured, and every rustle of straw or blanket carefully controlled to preserve warmth. Survival was a nightly choreography, honed over years and guided by instinct, experience, and attention to detail. Animals remained indispensable companions. Goats, sheep, cows, and occasionally pigs radiated gentle heat, their presence offering both physical and psychological comfort. Families observed subtle cues from these animals: the shift of a goat's weight, a cow's soft exhale, or a pig's restless shuffle, signaling discomfort or cold. Adjusting for these signs was part of the nightly routine, ensuring that both humans and animals endured together. The animals' warmth and rhythms became intertwined with the household's own survival strategy. The hearth was the lifeblood of the home. Fires were meticulously tended, with embers banked to sustain heat throughout the long hours of night. Wood was precious, rationed carefully, and sometimes replaced with dried dung or scraps when necessary. The act of maintaining the fire was both practical and meditative, a nightly ritual that required skill, patience, and foresight. Its gentle glow offered comfort, its warmth sustained life, and its presence created a sense of security amid the frozen darkness. Hunger shaped every aspect of nighttime life. Meals were sparse, thin broth, small portions of bread, or remnants of stored vegetables. Adults often sacrificed their portions for the young, ensuring children received nourishment. Even minimal food provided psychological reassurance, signaling that the body could endure until morning. Combined with layered clothing, careful positioning, and shared body heat, these small acts created a fragile but effective system for surviving the coldest nights. Segmented sleep remained vital. First sleep, after dusk, provided initial rest. A period of waking, known as middle sleep, allowed families to tend fires, adjust bedding, reposition children, or engage in quiet prayers or conversation. Second sleep carried the household toward dawn. This cyclical pattern was an instinctive adaptation to long, frigid nights, balancing rest with vigilance and maintaining survival through the harshest hours. Storytelling and superstition intertwined with survival. Tales of protective spirits, ancestral guardians, and charms offered mental comfort. Herbs like rosemary, sage, and lavender were placed under straw or near beds to ward off harm and reduce fear. These rituals strengthened endurance, fostered cultural knowledge, and reinforced family bonds. Stories transmitted wisdom and survival strategies, educating children in patience, vigilance, and the art of enduring winter. Dreams offered a fleeting sanctuary. Even fragmented sleep allowed the mind to imagine warmth, abundance, and safety. Summer fields, flowing rivers, and plentiful food existed in dreams as temporary havens from the cold pressing on the body. These imagined escapes nurtured hope and resilience, allowing the mind to rest even when the body shivered. They reminded sleepers of life beyond the frost, sustaining strength for the hours yet to come. Dawn brought slow relief. Frost etched intricate patterns on windows and floors, and families rose deliberately, stretching stiffened limbs and restoring circulation. Fires, carefully maintained overnight, were rekindled. Simple breakfasts, bread, porridge, or broth, fueled labor, tending animals, repairing tools, and preparing for the day's work. Gratitude lingered in these quiet moments. Surviving another night of relentless cold was an accomplishment, a testament to human ingenuity, endurance, and resilience. Winter nights, though harsh and unforgiving, were survived through strategy, cooperation, and careful attention to detail. Each ember, layer of straw, and shared blanket represented deliberate effort and care. Stories, prayers, and attentive management of animals reinforced survival strategies. In these frozen hours, the poor of the Middle Ages cultivated a profound mastery of endurance, patience, and the quiet art of living in harmony with the most relentless elements of nature. As the icy nights continued, families refined their skills of survival to an almost instinctive level. Every movement, every repositioning of blankets or bodies, every adjustment of straw or clothing was carefully measured. Adults instinctively protected children and the elderly, taking the coldest spots themselves, while the young curled tightly against siblings or parents to absorb warmth. This nightly choreography became second nature, a silent routine performed with precision born of necessity and experience. Animals remained central to the household's endurance. Cows, goats, sheep, and occasionally pigs provided not just warmth but comfort, a sense of life persisting in the frozen darkness. Families watched for subtle signals, a restless shuffle, a sigh, a shift in weight, and responded accordingly. The animals' warmth and rhythms were intertwined with the human's survival strategies, creating a delicate ecosystem in which each presence supported the other. The hearth was the heart of the night. Fires were carefully tended and banked to sustain warmth through the hours. Wood, precious and often scarce, was rationed with extreme care, and sometimes replaced with dried dung or scraps when necessary. The act of tending fire was both a ritual and a necessity, requiring skill, patience, and attention. Its gentle glow illuminated the cramped living space, offering reassurance as well as heat, transforming a simple dwelling into a sanctuary against the cold. Hunger shaped the nightly experience profoundly. Meals were minimal, thin broth, small portions of bread, or preserved vegetables. Adults frequently sacrificed their portions for children, ensuring the youngest could sleep with some nourishment. Even these small offerings provided psychological comfort, helping bodies withstand the cold. When combined with layered clothing, shared body heat, and careful positioning, these modest provisions formed an essential survival system. Segmented sleep was a practical adaptation to the long, cold nights. First sleep began shortly after sunset, allowing initial rest. A brief waking period, middle sleep, enabled tending the fire, repositioning children, adjusting blankets, or whispering prayers. Second sleep then carried the household toward dawn. This cyclical sleep pattern, developed over generations, balanced rest with vigilance, optimizing endurance and safety during the harshest hours. Storytelling and superstition provided mental warmth. Families whispered tales of protective spirits, ancestral guardians, and charms to ward off harm. Herbs like rosemary, sage, and lavender were placed under straw or near beds, offering comfort and reassurance. These rituals strengthened endurance, alleviated fear, and fostered patience. Stories conveyed practical knowledge and survival strategies to children, embedding lessons in resilience and care within the fabric of nightly life. Dreams offered another form of refuge. Even in interrupted sleep, individuals imagined warmth, abundance, and safety. Summer sunlight, flowing streams, and plentiful food existed within these fleeting visions, allowing the mind to escape the frozen reality of the body. These mental sanctuaries nurtured hope and resilience, helping families endure the long, bitter nights. With dawn, relief came gradually. Frost decorated windows and floors, and families stirred slowly, stretching stiffened limbs and restoring circulation. Fires, maintained carefully through the night, were rekindled to provide warmth for morning activities. Simple breakfasts, bread, porridge, or broth, supplied energy for labor, tending animals, repairing tools, and preparing fields. Even in these small rituals lingered gratitude. Surviving another night of relentless cold was an accomplishment, a quiet testament to endurance, ingenuity, and human resilience. Winter nights, though unforgiving, were survived through careful planning, cooperation, and subtle attention to detail. Every ember, layer of straw, and shared blanket represented deliberate effort. Stories, prayers, and attentive care of animals reinforced survival strategies. In these long, frozen hours, the poor of the Middle Ages developed a profound mastery of endurance, patience, and the quiet art of surviving nature's harshest conditions. As the nights stretched endlessly, the patterns of survival became ever more precise. Families moved in near silent coordination, each breath, shift of weight, and adjustment of clothing measured to preserve warmth. Parents instinctively bore the coldest corners, shielding children and the elderly, while the young curled tightly to maximize heat absorption. Even the smallest disturbance, a shifting blanket, a creaking floorboard, was carefully controlled. Survival was not accidental. It was a constant, disciplined practice honed through repetition and necessity. Animals continued to provide both warmth and reassurance. Goats, sheep, cows, and occasionally pigs radiated steady heat that merged seamlessly with the body warmth of humans. Families learned to read their subtle movements, shifts in weight, restless twitches, soft exhales, and responded by repositioning bedding or adding straw. These creatures were integral to survival. Their presence helped maintain the fragile balance of warmth, and their quiet companionship offered psychological comfort during the long hours of darkness. The hearth remained the centerpiece of nightly survival. Fires were tended with skill and foresight, embers banked to last through the night. Wood was precious, rationed carefully, and sometimes replaced with dried dung or scraps when necessary. The act of maintaining the fire became ritualized, a nightly meditation on endurance and careful attention. Its gentle glow illuminated the small living space, providing comfort as well as warmth, transforming the humble home into a sanctuary against frost and darkness. Hunger shaped every aspect of life in winter. Meals were minimal, often thin broth, a small piece of bread, or preserved vegetables. Adults frequently gave up their portions so children could have enough to sleep through the night. Even these modest offerings provided reassurance, allowing the body to cope with the cold more effectively. Combined with layered clothing, careful positioning, and shared body heat, these small provisions formed a vital survival system, enabling families to endure the harshest nights. Segmented sleep was critical. First sleep, after dusk, allowed initial rest. A brief waking period, middle sleep, enabled tending fires, repositioning children, adjusting blankets, or quiet prayer. Second sleep then carried the household toward dawn. This cyclical pattern, passed down through generations, balanced rest and vigilance, optimizing endurance during the most bitter hours. Storytelling and superstition reinforced endurance. Families whispered tales of protective spirits, ancestral guardians, and charms to ward off danger. Herbs such as rosemary, sage, or lavender were placed under straw or near beds to provide reassurance and psychological comfort. These practices strengthened patience, alleviated fear, and created continuity in cultural knowledge. Stories transmitted lessons of survival, caution, and resilience, embedding wisdom alongside practical routines of nightly life. Dreams provided temporary mental refuge. Even brief or interrupted sleep allowed the mind to imagine warmth, abundance, and safety. Images of summer, flowing rivers, and plentiful harvests offered sanctuary from the cold pressing against the body. These fleeting visions nurtured hope, helping families endure the relentless winter, sustaining mental and emotional resilience alongside physical endurance. Dawn brought gradual relief. Frost etched delicate patterns on windows and floors, and families stirred, stretching stiffened limbs and restoring circulation. Fires, maintained through the night, were rekindled to provide warmth for morning routines. Minimal breakfasts, bread, porridge, or broth, fueled daily labor, tending animals, repairing tools, and preparing fields. Gratitude lingered. Surviving another night of merciless cold was itself a triumph, a testament to endurance, ingenuity, and human resilience. Winter nights, though harsh and unyielding, were survived through careful planning, cooperation, and constant vigilance. Every ember, layer of straw, and shared blanket represented deliberate effort. Stories, prayers, and attentive care of animals reinforced strategies that allowed life to continue. In these long, frozen hours, the poor of the Middle Ages honed a quiet mastery of patience, resilience, and the art of surviving the harshest natural conditions. As winter deepened further, the nights seemed endless, stretching from dusk to dawn in an unbroken expanse of cold and darkness. Families moved with practiced care, each member instinctively aware of how to preserve warmth. Parents took the coldest corners of the room, shielding children and elders from drafts. Children curled tightly against siblings or adults, learning from an early age how to maximize heat and minimize exposure. Every adjustment, shift of blankets, rearrangement of straw, repositioning of the body, was deliberate, measured, and essential. Survival had become a nightly ritual, performed silently and instinctively, a choreography born of necessity. Animals continued to be indispensable partners in this survival system. Goats, sheep, cows, and sometimes pigs radiated warmth, their bodies acting as living heaters for the cramped households. Families observed subtle movements and sounds, soft sighs, restless shuffles, small twitches, and responded to ensure both humans and animals remained comfortable. The creature's presence offered not only physical heat but emotional reassurance, a constant reminder that life persisted even amidst the harshest conditions. The hearth remained the focal point of nighttime survival. Fires were banked with skill, embers carefully managed to sustain heat until morning. Wood was precious and often scarce, rationed meticulously, sometimes supplemented with dried dung or scraps. Tending the fire required patience, attention, and subtle skill, turning a simple necessity into a ritual of endurance. Its glow provided reassurance, warmth, and a sense of continuity, transforming the modest dwelling into a sanctuary from the freezing world outside. Hunger remained a constant companion. Meals were small and simple, thin broth, a piece of bread, or dried vegetables. Adults often sacrificed their portions for children, ensuring that the youngest could endure the night. Even the smallest meals offered psychological comfort, allowing bodies to maintain warmth and survive until morning. Alongside layered clothing, careful positioning, and shared body heat, these modest provisions formed a critical system of survival, allowing families to endure the brutal nights. Segmented sleep continued as a practical adaptation. First sleep, beginning shortly after dusk, allowed initial rest. Middle sleep, a brief period of awakening, enabled tending of fires, adjustments of bedding, repositioning of children, or quiet prayer. Second sleep carried the household toward dawn, completing the nightly cycle. This pattern, honed over generations, balanced rest and vigilance, ensuring both mental and physical endurance during the most frigid hours. Storytelling and superstition provided additional comfort. Families whispered tales of protective spirits, ancestral guardians, and charms to ward off danger. Herbs like rosemary, sage, or lavender were placed beneath straw or near sleeping areas, offering reassurance and psychological relief. These rituals, while symbolic, reinforced patience, reduced fear, and helped ensure sleep in a harsh environment. Stories also transmitted knowledge and survival strategies to children, embedding lessons of resilience and endurance alongside practical routines. Dreams offered a mental refuge. Even during brief or interrupted sleep, the mind conjured visions of warmth, abundance, and safety. Summer sunlight, flowing rivers, and plentiful food became temporary sanctuaries, allowing the imagination to escape the pressing cold. These fleeting visions nurtured hope, mental endurance, and resilience, sustaining families through the relentless winter nights. With the arrival of dawn, relief came slowly. Frost traced intricate patterns on windows and floors, and families rose carefully, stretching stiff limbs and restoring circulation. Fires, maintained through the night, were rekindled to provide warmth for the morning. Simple breakfasts, bread, porridge, or broth, fueled labor, tending animals, repairing tools, and preparing fields. Surviving another night was itself a quiet triumph, a testament to human endurance, ingenuity, and care. Winter nights, harsh and unrelenting, were endured through planning, cooperation, and constant vigilance. Every ember, layer of straw, and shared blanket represented careful effort. Stories, prayers, and attention to animals reinforced strategies that allowed life to continue. In these frozen hours, the poor of the Middle Ages developed a profound mastery of patience, endurance, and the art of surviving nature's harshest tests. As the nights grew longer and the frost more biting, the rhythm of survival deepened further. Families moved in practiced silence, each breath, each shift, each rustle of straw or blanket measured with care. Parents instinctively took the coldest spots, shielding children and elders, while the young curled tightly against each other to absorb warmth. Every adjustment, no matter how small, was deliberate, a learned response honed over repeated winters. Survival was no longer simply a matter of endurance, it had become an intricate nightly choreography, a symphony of careful movements and instinctive decisions. Animals continued to play a vital role in enduring the cold. Goats, sheep, cows, and occasionally pigs radiated gentle, constant warmth. Their soft breathing and subtle movements offered cues that required careful observation: a restless shuffle, a sigh, a shift in weight. Families responded instinctively, adjusting straw, bedding, or positions to maintain comfort. The animal's presence not only provided physical warmth but also emotional reassurance, a quiet heartbeat that reminded everyone that life persisted even in the harshest conditions. The hearth remained the nucleus of nighttime survival. Fires were tended meticulously, embers banked to last until morning. Wood was precious, rationed carefully, and sometimes supplemented with dried dung or scraps. Tending the fire demanded patience, skill, and vigilance. The warm glow of embers provided both physical and psychological comfort, transforming a modest dwelling into a sanctuary against the relentless frost outside. Its light became a small but vital beacon of hope, warmth, and continuity. Hunger influenced every aspect of nightly life. Meals were sparse, thin broth, small pieces of bread, or preserved vegetables. Adults often sacrificed their portions for children, ensuring that the young could endure the night. Even modest food offered reassurance, allowing the body to tolerate the cold more effectively. Combined with layered clothing, careful positioning, and shared body heat, these small acts created an essential survival system, enabling families to endure even the harshest nights. Segmented sleep continued as a key adaptation. First sleep, shortly after dusk, allowed initial rest. A period of middle sleep offered time for tending fires, adjusting bedding, repositioning children, or quiet prayer. Second sleep then carried the household toward dawn, completing the nightly cycle. This pattern, developed over generations, balanced rest with vigilance, providing both physical and mental endurance during the coldest hours. Storytelling and superstition intertwined with survival strategies. Families whispered tales of protective spirits, ancestral guardians, and charms meant to ward off danger. Herbs like rosemary, sage, and lavender were placed beneath straw or near sleeping areas to provide reassurance. These rituals strengthened endurance, reduced fear, and fostered patience. Stories transmitted practical wisdom to children, teaching resilience and caution alongside survival routines. Dreams offered a mental escape. Even during brief or interrupted sleep, people imagined warmth, abundance, and safety. Summer sunlight, flowing streams, and plentiful harvests became temporary refuges, allowing the mind to escape the pressing cold. These fleeting visions nurtured hope and resilience, sustaining families through the relentless nights. Dawn brought relief, slowly but surely. Frost decorated windows and floors, and families stirred, stretching stiffened limbs and restoring circulation. Fires, maintained through the night, were rekindled to provide warmth for morning activities. Simple breakfasts, bread, porridge, or broth, fueled labor, tending animals, repairing tools, and preparing for fields. Surviving another night was a quiet triumph, a testament to endurance, ingenuity, and human resilience. Winter nights, though harsh and merciless, were endured through careful planning, cooperation, and constant attention to detail. Every ember, layer of straw, and shared blanket represented deliberate effort and care. Stories, prayers, and attentive management of animals reinforced strategies that allowed life to continue. In these frozen hours, the poor of the Middle Ages developed a profound mastery of patience, endurance, and the quiet art of surviving the harshest elements of nature. As the nights of winter pressed on, families grew ever more attuned to the subtleties of survival. Each member moved with practiced care, understanding instinctively when to shift position, redistribute blankets, or adjust straw bedding. Parents continued to take the coldest corners, shielding children and the elderly, while the young learned to curl tightly and remain still, maximizing warmth and conserving energy. Every sound, every movement, every breath was part of a careful balance. Too much disturbance could break the fragile ecosystem of heat and comfort. Survival had become an unspoken, nightly ritual, repeated with precision and patience. Animals remained integral to enduring the cold. Cows, goats, sheep, and occasionally pigs provided steady warmth, their presence a silent source of comfort. Families watched for subtle signals, restless twitches, small shuffles, soft sighs, and responded by adjusting bedding, straw, or positioning. The creature's warmth merged with human body heat to create a network of mutual survival. Beyond the physical benefit, their calm presence offered emotional reassurance, a gentle pulse of life in the dark, frozen night. The hearth continued to serve as the heart of the household. Fires were tended carefully, embers banked to provide steady heat through the hours until dawn. Wood was scarce and precious, rationed meticulously, sometimes supplemented with dried dung or other combustible scraps. The act of tending fire required skill, attention, and patience, becoming both a practical task and a nightly ritual. Its glow brought warmth, security, and a small sense of continuity, transforming the humble home into a sanctuary against the bitter winter outside. Hunger shaped nightly life profoundly. Meals were modest, thin broth, small portions of bread, or preserved vegetables. Adults often sacrificed their portions for children, ensuring that the youngest could endure the night. Even these minimal offerings provided reassurance, giving the body sustenance to survive the cold. Together with layered clothing, careful positioning, and shared body heat, these small acts formed a delicate but essential survival system, enabling families to endure even the harshest nights. Segmented sleep remained a critical adaptation. First sleep, shortly after sunset, allowed initial rest. A period of middle sleep provided time for tending fires, adjusting bedding, repositioning children, or engaging in quiet prayer. Second sleep then carried the household toward dawn. This cyclical sleep pattern, passed down through generations, balanced rest and vigilance, optimizing endurance and safety during the longest, coldest hours. Storytelling and superstition complemented these survival strategies. Families whispered tales of protective spirits, ancestral guardians, and charms to ward off harm. Herbs like rosemary, sage, and lavender were placed under straw or near sleeping areas, offering comfort and reassurance. These practices strengthened patience, reduced fear, and encouraged sleep despite harsh conditions. Stories transmitted lessons of resilience and caution to children, embedding cultural wisdom alongside practical routines. Dreams offered mental escape from the unyielding cold. Even in interrupted or brief sleep, individuals imagined warmth, abundance, and safety. Summer fields, flowing streams, and plentiful food became temporary sanctuaries for the mind, allowing it to rest while the body endured frost and hunger. These fleeting visions nurtured hope, sustaining the spirit alongside physical endurance. With the slow arrival of dawn, relief emerged. Frost decorated windows and floors, and families stirred, stretching stiff limbs and restoring circulation. Fires, carefully maintained overnight, were rekindled to provide warmth for morning routines. Simple breakfasts, bread, porridge, or broth, fueled labor, tending animals, repairing tools, and preparing fields. Surviving another night was itself a quiet triumph, a testament to human endurance, resourcefulness, and resilience. Winter nights, though harsh, were navigated with ingenuity, cooperation, and constant attention to subtle details. Each ember, layer of straw, and shared blanket represented deliberate effort. Stories, prayers, and attentive management of animals reinforced strategies that allowed life to continue. In these frozen hours, the poor of the Middle Ages cultivated a profound mastery of patience, endurance, and the quiet art of surviving nature's harshest tests. As the winter deepened even further, the nights began to feel almost endless, stretching like a quiet tunnel of cold that seemed to swallow sound, movement, and time itself. Families settled into their nightly routines with practiced calm, each gesture shaped by years of hardship. Parents continued to position themselves along the draftiest edges of the room, placing their bodies like shields around the children. The youngest nestled between siblings or parents, instinctively finding pockets of warmth. Every small motion, the pulling up of a blanket, the shifting of straw beneath them, was measured and gentle, so as not to disturb the fragile balance of shared heat. The animals that shared their living space remained vital companions. The steady warmth from cows, goats, and sheep created a stabilizing cushion of heat that spread through the cramped interior. Families monitored their movements with quiet attention, noting when an animal shivered or shifted uneasily, adjusting bedding or adding straw to maintain comfort for all. The rhythmic breathing of the animals became a calming presence, a heartbeat in the cold, offering emotional reassurance as much as physical warmth. The hearth, with its banked embers, held the home together. Even when flames had died down to a soft red glow, the heat it radiated felt like a lifeline. Wood was used sparingly, each small piece added only when absolutely necessary. Often the fire was fed with dried dung, straw twists, or leftover scraps, anything that could hold a slow burn through the night. The person responsible for tending the embers, typically a parent or an older child, moved with a kind of reverence, understanding how crucial the steady heat was for survival. Hunger became sharper in the cold, stretching into the quiet hours of the night. Meals were simple and sparse, almost symbolic sustenance: a spoonful of broth, a handful of porridge, a small piece of preserved root. Adults often ate the least, saving what little there was for the children. But even a small meal created a sense of stability. The warmth of food helped bodies cope with freezing temperatures, and the comfort of eating together eased the weight of fear. Segmented sleep allowed families to endure the long nights. First sleep brought rest and quiet. Middle sleep, a natural waking in the deep hours, provided time to check the fire, shift blankets, drink water, or whisper a prayer. Second sleep brought them to dawn. This rhythm gave structure to the darkness, creating intervals of hope and responsibility that made the frigid nights more bearable. In the silence, storytelling continued to play an important role. Soft, barely audible whispers traveled from parent to child as tales of guardians, saints, spirits, and ancestors wove through the air. These stories served as gentle reminders that others had endured similar hardships. They carried lessons from generations past, warnings, wisdom, comforts. Herbs placed near bedding, rosemary, thyme, sage, offered not only their faint scent but also a symbolic protection that soothed the mind. Dreams became precious escapes. Even when sleep was shallow or interrupted, the mind found ways to drift toward images of sunlight, summer fields, flowing rivers, and warm breezes. These fleeting visions provided emotional refuge, helping the heart stay strong even as the body battled the cold. Hope often lived in these silent dreams, offering strength to rise again when morning came. Dawn crept slowly into the frozen homes. Frost clung in delicate patterns to wooden beams, windows, and even clothing left too close to the walls. Families stirred gradually, joints stiff from the cold. Breath hung in the air as they stretched and sat upright. The embers were coaxed back into a flame, filling the room with the first true warmth of the day. A small breakfast, however modest, renewed their strength. Then came the tasks of tending animals, gathering limited firewood, repairing tools, and preparing for the work ahead. Every night survived felt like a silent victory. In these long winters, the poor of the Middle Ages learned to endure through cooperation, patience, and quiet resilience. The smallest rituals, adjusting a blanket, stoking an ember, whispering a story, became essential parts of their survival. Together, they navigated the harshest cold with resourcefulness and determination, preserving warmth not just in their homes, but in their spirits.